There we go. Oh, hi, Lucie. Welcome. Good to see you.
Hello. Oh, there we go.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Okay. Why don't we make a start? And Alan, if you're able to get your screen share to operate properly, then we'll give it a try. If not, absolutely no worries. But we're a few minutes in, and so I think we'll get going. So everybody who's watching, thank you very much for tuning into this session here at CraftCon 2021. What a joy to be able to be undertaking this session, and a massive thank you to the Three Counties Cider and Perry Association that has worked incredibly tirelessly and hard to bring this to the fore. My name is Gabe Cook. I'm the Ciderologist, and I'm privileged to be hosting this panel here today, this session, and this is all about kegging the technical challenge. We have got with us here some of the finest and most talented keggers in the country, and they're going to be sharing with us their pills of wisdom, as well as the delivery man who's dropping off some cider with James in the background there. No doubt. Once again, we would love your audience participation. We have the chat function. Please do put in your general chit chat and interactions with each other. If it's a very specific question, please use the Q&A function, and I'll be able to try and find you in there and pull that out. But enough from me. I'm going to hand over very briefly to our panelists to get them to introduce themselves, and then we're going to kick off. James, would you like to start?
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm James Forbes. I'm the co-founder of Little Pomona Cider in North Herefordshire.
Super. Thank you very much. Richard.
Yeah, hi, Richard Reynolds. I run Barbourne Cider in Worcestershire. I've had various different experiences with kegging, which I can share, hopefully share some of them with you today.
Super. Thank you very much, Rich. And to Lucie. Well, we can't hear you, Lucie. I think you've muted your microphone. Oh, okay. We've just lost Lucie there for 1 second. Hopefully to be imminently substituted by Mr. Hogan back in the room. There he is.
It's not good enough.
Here we go. Alan, maybe we'll just hang fire on the screen share. Maybe it's causing more issue than it's worth. Would you like to tell the good people, the good viewers, who you are and why you are here with us today?
Okay, Alan Hogan. I run, in conjunction with Jane Hogan, I run a business called Hogan Cider. We've been operating commercially since 2005. And we are pleased now that we're out of lockdown. And I don't know how you guys are faring as far as business, but we've had a tremendous start to this month, where we're nearly at the end now. So I'm in a much better mood than I was a year ago, and much more optimistic as well, and really looking forward to restoring things to certainly close to what we were enjoying before everything collapsed.
Absolutely. And your optimistic mood is being exemplified by your rather snazzy shirt that you're wearing. You're putting me to shame. Thank you very much. Lucie's going to come back in just a moment. Lucie Mayerová from Naked Orchards Cider. She has a vast amount of experience of working with different types of kegs product too. We'll get to speak to her when she joins. But we're gonna kick off here. And Alan, I think I'm gonna turn to you first of all, maybe as an audio description rather than a visual description around, you know, when we're talking about keg ciders, that isn't a singular entity, is it? We're talking about the potential for quite a number of different types of pack, of size. Where do we start with this?
Okay, I mean, I attended a meeting of the Three Counties, and I'll tell you, it's probably 20 years ago, and it was in a pub in Worcester called the Dragon Inn. I don't know if it's still there. Richard might know whether it is or not. Yes, he's nodding. So it's still going, and I went because it was I think, I don't know, it must have been an AGM or something, or maybe just a regular meeting, and they were serving cider out of something called a Manu Cube. I don't know if any of our audience have come across a Manu Cube. These were imported by Vigo, and they were primarily for wine, but they were sort of, it was a bit of a leg. You had to build the box and put inside it a liner. So it was probably a first attempt at bag-in-box. But really, it was most unattractive sitting on the bar. It looked like a bit of industrial kit. It just had, it made of plastic, but very unattractive. And also dubious in terms of its capability of keeping the cider fresh. Then we saw an awful lot of 40 or 4-gallon tubs, you know, the usual thing with a tap on the bottom. And they were very ubiquitous around that time. They'd end up at festivals. Some pubs would put them on the bar as well, and the cider would slowly warm up under the lights. I know of one producer, and I'm not going to mention their name, who used to hot fill these tubs. So effectively pasteurize and sterilize the cider before putting them into these tubs. And then what they would do is leave the lid off the tub until it started to acetify. And it was at that point they sent it out to customers. Again, not a good example of sharing cider.
So if we've got to this point, let's step into the realm of if those are not kegs, then what are we talking about when it pertains to actual kegging technology then? Okay, well, the obvious one is the stainless steel keg that you see beers being distributed in. We use those and have done for a while. The next thing that has come on, become available and has really disrupted the industry is the key keg product. Now, there are lots of imitators of that, but technically it looks very, very good. The ability to keep cider fresh because it's not coming into contact with any gas at all, because of the bag being the propellant gas just squeezes the bag and forces the product out. So that has I think revolutionized opportunities for the cider maker now, because they're easily acquired. They do have some downfalls, such as price. They're quite expensive per unit. I don't know if people feel that that's a barrier, but it certainly does. You know, a 30-litre key keg is coming out at close to £15, which is pretty prohibitive. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the has improved substantially and being much wider distribution of cider because people are able to ship it. But of course, the other thing is it's not just technical; it's also commercial. We couldn't sell abroad with anything other than these one-way disposable kegs. We certainly couldn't get product to some of the geographies that we're selling to now. And also in the UK, there are people like Ebria, who I'm sure people have come across, who will ship a keg, take an order in Durham, for instance, and ship it from Cornwall, next day delivery. So it's revolutionized the commerce as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, just on one-way kegs, Alan, while we're on talking about it. I was at Ludlow Spring event, I think 2 years back.
Yep.
And they were running a craft ale bar, and I looked at all the kegs at the back of there, the one-way kegs, and there must have been 7 or 8 different designs.
Yes,
these one-way kegs. So they're a bit of an interesting assortment of offerings in that space. And I know you favour key keg, but there are all kinds of they have their own micromatic fitting, and then you've got all of the other one-way plastic ones that usually have a Sankey fitting. So there's quite a few considerations, aren't there, in choosing your one-way keg, and also the environmental aspect of it.
Well, yeah,
we're going to be coming on to that in a moment, if that's all right. At this point, I'd like to bring in Lucie. Let's try and bring in Lucie. Let's see if we can get to moment. Hi, Lucie.
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Right. Absolutely.
Different browsers and it works. Brilliant.
Great to have you with us, Lucie. Lucie, we're starting to chat through some of the different physical keg types, and I know that you've got an experience of utilizing a number of different types, some of which are sat behind you. Give us a little bit of, I'm interested as somebody who's relatively new to some of the technical aspects of kegs. What are these different types, relative difference between metal or plastic, or those that have a bag lining, and what are some of the considerations and differences when approaching these different kegs?
So I have to say, I've never used normal stainless steel kegs, so I can compare, but we're a bit afraid of kegging to start with. We don't really supply pubs at the moment, but we know we can with these, and we probably will in the future. So I've got 3 different ones here. This one is called Key Keg. Some of you may have seen it before. It's basically a double-layered plastic case, and inside it is a metallized bag. So what it does when you empty it, the bag collapses, so your cider is still protected because there's no air or nothing else surrounding it. The disadvantage of that, as Richard said, they've got their own fitting, so you do need to get the head with it for filling, dispensing, and everything like that. They stack really nice. They come in different sizes, but they are one-way kegs, so you buy the whole thing, use it, and then there's no real way of recycling it because the bag is mixed and the outline is PET, so it's not really recyclable. So there's a second keg, which is pretty heavy when it's empty. It's very green and it's called Eco Draft. The advantage of that, normally you need a tool to undo this one, but this one has been moderated for display purposes, so you can just unscrew it. And inside that is a bag. That's what it looks like when it comes new. It's just normal plastic bag, so there's no aluminium lining or anything like that. But basically you just buy the outer layer, and then the only thing you have to swap is the bags. So it's a bit more affordable, a bit more environmentally friendly. Again, it comes in with its own fitting. But yeah, they're quite nice. The initial investment is a bit higher, but then you pay a lot less for the refills. And then the third one, it's probably one that we use most. That's our clever head. Anyway, we can get to that later. It's called Eco Keg. It's made in Wales by a guy who designed it, understands about everything that relates to this product. On the outside is a recycled plastic case, and inside is a PET bottle which is clear, so you can see your product. And this comes with standard fittings, so pubs will take it. Sankey, Grandy, any of the other ones as well. And the good thing about this again is that you only swap the insides, and this is very durable. He filled one up with water and dropped it from the top of his warehouse, and it was fine. It was absolutely fine. When we got there, he said, "Oh, they're very durable." We were like, "Oh, okay, what does that mean?" Well, he took one and threw it up in the air. It dropped down and it was fine again. So, yeah, they're really good. So the outer layer is fully recycled. Again, you buy the outside, and if your outside gets damaged or anything, you just bring it back. He'll give you a new one and just remold this one into the next one for the next person. So, and we have found a reuse for these ones as well, which is quite interesting. So this year, because we made a lot of different small batches, especially Perry, we tried fermenting in them. So they're not designed to be reused, but we thought we'll give it a go. And we fermented in them under pressure, and we're just opening some of the products, and it's quite interesting, really. So.
Well, brilliant. Thank you, Lucie, for quite a summation there. At this point, he's already jumped the gun. I'd like to bring in Mr. Forbes, who also has some considerable experience of fermenting in kegs. I think it's fair to say at this point that kegs classically are synonymous with the injection of some carbon dioxide within to them, whether they be steel or plastic, in order to achieve that carbonation. But James is a strong proponent of I believe that it was keg conditioned. Is that right, James? Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. We started keg conditioning in, I think it was, we came up with the idea before the 2018 harvest, and then we took that idea from a concept on a piece of paper to a finished product, and we released it in May 2019. I think we're super low intervention cider makers, so the fact that we don't use chemical or mechanical interventions, if we can possibly help it, informs a lot of how we package them. So when we looked at kegging, we became a bit kind of concerned about getting that done on a contract basis, because the standard industry practice is sterile filtration, pasteurization, and forced carbonation. And so whilst we were prepared to compromise on, say, the carbonation side of it, we weren't prepared to compromise on filtration and pasteurization. So we began to look at how we could fill kegs ourselves economically. The one-way kegs, and particularly key kegs, seemed to be the best option. And at the time, we realized that the key kegs were not environmentally very sound because they were hard to recycle. But moving on 3 years, they're a bit easier now. There's a company called The First Mile, which will take away your kegs and recycle them for a charge, but it can be done. But in terms of conditioning in a key keg, it's exactly like bottle conditioning in glass. There's very little difference. You need minimal equipment to do it. You need a pump, a coupler, a couple of lines, maybe an adapter, and you go through exactly the same process of either priming with sugar and yeast, or just priming with sugar and filling the keg and letting it do its thing. What you have to remember is to fill the keg upside down. For anyone trying it, make sure you follow the instructions or you'll ruin lots of your kegs. But it's a very simple process, and something that any craft cider maker could do if they wanted to do. The disadvantages are it's quite limiting. So all your cider is going to be dry. It's going to ferment out to dryness unless possibly you're cold racking and that final racking is into keg, and you're confident you can slow that fermentation down and keep some residual sugar. So you're going to make dry sparkling ciders or perries. You could fill still dry ciders as well into keg, and they would dispense fine. So, but it is slightly limiting in that sense. So if you want sweetness, you're going to have to find a different path into keg.
Super. We will come back round to chat more about sort of conditioning in a moment. One of the aspects of kegs for cider makers, of course, there is cost implication, which is why the one-way keg is most appealing, I'm sure, for lots of people because of the simplicity of it. Alan, as somebody who I know you do indeed own your own kegs, what are some of the pros and cons of owning your own steel kegs?
I suppose accessibility to a stock and inventory. We've in the past, before we committed to a large number of kegs, we ended up running out, and it's very easy to do that. So recovery is a challenge. Getting them all back. You always know how many you've bought, but you never know how many you still own, which is a frightening prospect, really. I mean, some of them just disappear. I was watching a program on television some years ago, and it was about cleaning up the Thames, and a keg of ours appeared in the picture, and it had been pushed into the river by God knows who, and ended up floating down the Thames and was picked up by one of these barges that sweeps the river. Anyway, so you can, and people steal them and repurpose them, but we've probably lost half of our inventory over a 10-year period.
They do end up at Keg Watch, quite a helpful organisation.
Yes,
on some yard in up north somewhere, don't they?
In Burton, yeah. Your volume is very low, Richard.
I know we've got 4 or 5 up there at the moment, but it's finding the time and the inclination to go up and get them.
Yes.
Sure. Rich, if possible, if there is a means of turning your volume up as high as humanly possible, which might involve you moving your mouth closer to the computer, possibly as well. There is, of course, a third space between owning your own stock of kegs and purchasing one-way kegs, which is an effective keg rental service, something like Kegstar. Has anybody had experience with utilizing these keg rental services and the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, I have used them in the past. The only thing I would caution is that I've heard this. We've not experienced this, but I've heard of organizations, breweries particularly, who have rented kegs and have been told that the kegs arrived sterile, but in fact weren't sterile and had remains of the last product in them. Now that's going to ruin that keg or the beer or cider that goes into that keg. So just a cautionary warning: make sure you get some sort of a guarantee that the sterility of the keg before you use it if you're renting them. The other thing about renting as well is that you enter a financial commitment. You have responsibility for that asset. At the end of the rental period, they'll either rent it to you again, whether it exists or not, or ask for the keg to be returned. So you're into a long-term financial commitment if you're renting kegs. That's my understanding.
Absolutely. Now, Richard, tell us a little bit about what kind of kegs you use, and what the nature of the relationship with the pubs are that you supply them to, and what type of people are drinking your kegged product.
Okay, well, we looked at the economics of one-way keg and renting keg, and found that purchasing second-hand 50-litre kegs was the most economical way of doing it. So we've got our own small fleet of kegs, 50-litre stainless steel kegs, and we only supply them in to pubs we don't supply them into wholesale, and that's principally so, as Alan pointed out, you can hopefully keep track of where your kegs are, but it limits your market.
Absolutely.
So yeah, you mentioned you said who drinks the cider. Well, you mentioned the Dragon earlier on. They have our draft keg product in there, and it is unfiltered. So when we're talking about the technical aspects of it, I think James was saying that everything is principally sterile filtered, carbonated, pasteurized, and filled. Not necessarily in that order, obviously. We try and differentiate our cider away from the standard 4.5% filtered carbonated cider by going for the unfiltered approach. So yeah, that's kind of what we're looking at with our keg cider.
And how do you stabilize the product, Richard?
Okay, well, I've been through quite a long journey with stabilization of the cider. Initially, we thought we would do a still unfiltered product by hot filling our own kegs.
Yeah.
And that worked to a fashion. But the longer the keg sat there and the warmer it got, the less stable the result ended up with. So I think our experience there was you need a proper keg cleaning piece of kit. We were just using a pressure washer and hot water and caustic, and I don't think it was cleaning the spears properly. So even with hot filling, we'd end up with product over time that would basically end up fobbing. So we then moved to contracting that out, and I can't mention any of the names, obviously, these third parties, but we were hot filling Arlingtons, which is a huge bag-in box, basically 1,000-litre bag-in box, and then shipping that Arlington, presumably stable cider, sort of medium sweetness, off to the third party, and they were carbonating it and filling.
Yeah.
And we did the first batch. It seemed great, but it was flying out, and we sold it all, and it all appeared to be stable. The second batch, which arrived in July, within a couple of weeks, pub customers were phoning up saying, "Oh, we've got some fobbing issues," and I lost a couple of pub accounts as a result of it. So it was, we didn't really know what it was. Thought it was dispense, which is even worse, really, because you're blaming the customer for why your product is fobbing. But it was basically fermenting in the keg. So somewhere between it entering the Arlington stable and then coming out of the tap to the customer, it clearly picked up some yeast and was alive. So following that, we then moved to a much bigger, well-known cider maker to do our kegging, and they didn't filter it, not sterile filtered. They took our product, we pre-sweeten, pre-blend the product and send it to the contractor ready done. So their role really is stabilizing and filling, carbonating and filling. So, and that worked absolutely fine. And then following that, they referred us down to a company in Somerset who are currently filling our kegs. And we've had no problems whatsoever. The product, again, isn't filtered. It's carbonated. And then, where do we go? It's carbonated, pasteurized, and then cooled down and filled into keg. That seems to work really well.
There we go. So there's obviously multiple different methodologies and technologies that one can get to the end result. James, you obviously take a different approach to this, and some of the challenges and the considerations that Richard and Alan are having to sort of consider and undertake. Tell us about some of the potentially, different challenges that you undertake with your keg conditioning, and what the impacts of those products out in the trade.
I would say the challenges, we're lucky because all the ciders we produce are technically dry, so we don't have these issues of having to stabilize them as they go into the keg, and we don't have to worry about them being stable in keg. In fact, our experience is that they actually improve with time in keg. That's the interesting thing, just as they often do in bottle. I think out in the marketplace, it's been a really interesting, if short, experience, because obviously we started kegging and we were getting a lot of success, and we were getting listings in exactly the sort of places where we wanted to be, which was craft beer bars and places like that. And then, of course, the pandemic came along, and all of these places closed down, and we stopped kegging. So we are restarting that program now, and we've been also serving from Key Keg in our tap room as well. And the products just look great, and people, it provides a really good opportunity for us to share ciders and to do, to do growler fills and all that sort of thing, which people really like.
Absolutely. Now, Lucie, obviously we've been talking primarily here about the trade, about pubs, but I know that you utilize keg products a lot at sort of events and festivals. What are some of the challenges or considerations that you face when you're serving your products on draft at those events?
Well, like James, we don't really pasteurize any of our product. So keeping it stable is mostly keeping it cool. There's definitely a big challenge, especially if you're at indoor festivals and stuff like that. So we have implemented buckets with ice water, and we always pray for not so hot weather, because then it just ferments like mad. But we do find that the product, once it's in the keg, with a little bit of CO2, it does keep 2 weeks fine, and it doesn't really carbonate. I think some of the challenges are dispensing. So we came up, so kegs, especially something like this eco keg, it's not designed to be disconnected when it's half full. It's designed to be connected, emptied, and then disconnected. So when you disconnect this, it just dribbles everywhere. So we came up with this clever idea. It's mostly Chris's invention. And basically he's taken out the one-way valves, which are on most heads, and put some taps on there. Sorry, you can't see it. Put some taps on there, and then you can put in gas in through the out as well. And that way you just clean the tube and it doesn't dribble. But we do love our kegs, and because it keeps much better in the keg than in the containers that we serve into. So we take them everywhere. We take them to the markets, we drink from them at home, we take them to events, festivals, and everything like that. And we just absolutely love them. And
Super.
it's not that complicated. We were a bit scared at first, and we thought, oh no, there's so many technical bits too. But once you get the idea of it, it's really quite simple.
Bravo. Thanks, Lucie. We're just going to jump to a few questions. We've had a few questions kind of pop in. The first one came from Mark van der Veek, who was stating he was curious as to what purpose everybody was kegging for. Sales to pubs, serving in their own environment, festivals. I think the answer to that, as we've seen, is all of the above. Stephanie asks, has anybody tried poly kegs? More recyclable than key keg. Can choose bag or bagless, can choose any fittings, has safety valves, etc. I wonder whether Stephanie is quite possibly a salesperson for the poly keg. I'm not certain. Has anybody used poly keg at all or come across it?
Yeah, I've come across it, but we chose not to use it. It seemed competitively priced with others on the market, but we've sort of standardized on key keg.
Yeah.
So there was no compelling reason to change.
I think Gabe, I think it's now true to say that key kegs are 100% recyclable. They used to be like 93%, but I think every part of it is recyclable. And as I said before, the first mile will pick up your empty kegs for a fee, and we have them recycled. So,
super. We've got another question here. What about, from Christian up in Aberdeen? Hi, Christian. What about kegging keeved cider? Would this not produce a slightly sweet cider? Has anybody endeavoured to do that at all?
Yeah, we're keeving, and our French Revelation blend, and that's going into keg as well as bottle. No, we're not fermenting in the keg, and we're filling cider, so we don't particularly want a fermentation in the keg.
Mm. Super. The same question was also asked by Benjamin there. Magdalena, all the way from Italy. Hi, Magdalena from Floribunda, asks if some of you sell their cider in kegs and bottles, do you sell the same cider in the two formats, or do you make different interpretations of the style for the two different formats? And I suppose why, if you did?
No, we're using the same blend, no change.
Yeah, and we're using the same blend as well, and it's really useful on a small scale because you can keg some of it and bottle some of it at the same time. It's very interchangeable, and it's really easy.
There's the one thing that hasn't been covered, Gabe. I'm sure a lot of the audience will have come across mini kegs. These are 8.9 pint or 5 litre. We're seeing those becoming quite popular. And have just started filling them. It's a bit of a pain filling them because they're so small, but I think it's just another market opportunity which we can't ignore.
Absolutely. Interesting to see how the market changes. We've still got a few minutes left to have some conversations. If there are any final questions, please do put them into the Q&A, and we will endeavour to go through them. I'm just interested to pull back to some of the real sort of technical questions for those undertaking, let's call it classical kegging rather than keg conditioning. In terms of, it's one thing obviously to have carbon dioxide placed into your cider, but there are different methodologies of doing that, whether that be sort of, you know, inline or sort of like sort of in tank pressurizing, or is it directly into the keg? I'm not so au fait with the techniques. Could Alan or Richard give us a bit of a insight as to what some of the methodologies and techniques are?
Yeah, with our keg products, we're so we chill the cider down. The colder it is, the easier it is to dissolve the CO2, and we then inject the CO2 in line, but then the cider goes into a pressurized vessel, so can't break out. So it's relatively simple. Nothing terribly complicated about it at all.
It's stuffing it into the keg that's the problem, isn't it? Because it's the counter pressure aspect. And this is where the expense of doing it yourself adds up if you want to follow that approach. A lot of the kit isn't cheap and it's not entry level at all. So you've got inline carbonation, but you've then got to get that product stable and get it into a keg without the CO2 escaping. So, yeah.
Well, we get around that by pumping it into a pressurized vessel, which has top pressure on it. So you then avoid any breakout of CO2.
This seems to link into Dave just asked a question, Dave Bailey. What do you need other than the kegs themselves to fill or to carbonate? It seems like there are certain pieces of equipment that are necessary and does involve some proportion of cost. If we just jump forward a little bit then to the point of dispense, because obviously the technical aspects of these keg cider don't finish once you have sent the keg off and away to the pub. It's obviously ensuring that the cellaring and the management and the understanding of those kegs are done sufficiently well so that the drink is presented in the way that you intend it to be at the start. Are there any particularly important things that those who are cellaring these kind of kegged products need to be aware of, or anything particularly different from how they might be approaching a kegged beer, for example?
Can I attempt to answer that one?
Please.
Yeah, our business is very much focused on the craft beer world. And what we're discovering is that there's an awful lot of skilled people in outlets, in bars and pubs. If they're marketing their products to a craft sector or craft customers, then they tend to be very self-reliant and they know how to dispense beer, and they also quickly learn how to dispense cider. 15 years ago, when this movement wasn't even thought of, you'd go into a traditional pub and there was very little knowledge. People, they knew something about the bar, but they didn't know anything about the cellar. And they weren't self-reliant either. They relied on the brewers to come out and sort things out for them. But our experience is that the craft bars are much more in tune with keeping product well. And in fact, they have dictated to us that we use key kegs because they've standardized on them with their beers that they're buying from people like Northern Monk or Buxton or Wylam. All these craft brewers are supplying these places, and the cellar staffs are much more skilled in our experience. I don't know whether you agree with that, James. You're on mute. Ryan.
So absolutely, Aaron. I think, we positioned our kegs at a premium level and we were targeting places, the sort of places you were mentioning. So they're comfortable with key kegs and they look after things really well. So we're pleased, definitely.
I'm interested to come around to carbonation in terms of the quantity of carbonation. One of the fun and the interesting things whenever one tastes a carbonated cider, whether that be bottled or in keg, is the level of carbonation within the product, which hopefully is what the cider maker intended and is what they put in, or potentially maybe there's been some change at the point of serve. But I'm always interested as to why cider makers do present their products with the certain level of carbonation that they do. Lucie, could you tell us when you're approaching the carbonation of your products, what kind of carbonation do you like? And does that differ from a cider or a perry or something more acid driven or tannic driven?
So when we ever carbonate, it's in the kegs, and as Alan said, get it cold, and then it just absorbs the CO2. There is a fourth type of keg that we use. I haven't got it on display, and we use that mostly for playing around or bottling, which on a small scale is brilliant. And the reason for carbonating, I would say a lot of people are used to cider being carbonated, so we occasionally carbonate. I wouldn't say we do everything sparkling. Most people are used to cider being carbonated, so we try and meet that market as well. And I think sparkling perry can be better than champagne. And we decide whether to carbonate something based on its taste mostly. If we try different things, we taste the initial product and then decide what to do with it. Sometimes the carbonation completely kills the flavour. Sometimes the carbonation lifts the flavour. And I think that's important to understand as a cider maker, and just try it and give it to different people to taste. And someone will go, oh, that's horrible, it's sparkling. Someone will go, oh, I love that, it's sparkling. So I think different people do different things. And we always try and have a draft product, and maybe then some of it we carbonate and put it in bottles. I think it's different to have a wider range for people. Just try out what works, and sometimes it will not work, and you think, oh, this is really nice, and then someone will drink it and go, what is this? This is horrible. So try and error has been definitely the way that we've discovered a lot of things that work don't work. But I think try it yourself and see. And if you ever want to try carbonate something on a small scale and see what the product will taste like, go and buy a soda stream. It worked.
Wow. The soda stream, the good old soda stream.
And you can carbonate one bottle, see what it tastes like, share it with friends, and get some feedback on it. And you don't have, before you invest into kegs or other carbonating machines or whatever. So.
The original carbonation. James, just before we come on to you in a second to talk about this specific interest around carbonation of keg conditioning, Rich, tell us a little about your approach to carbonation levels and how you approach looking to achieve.
Okay, well, it's interesting that one of the comments there was that people expect, or that a lot of cider drinkers expect cider to be fizzy, and I think that's half the issue. I know we've got another session on the market for kegged cider, but the condition, the keg conditioned stuff going into the craft bars is only a very small part of the total cider market. And certainly around me, most of the pubs are selling the kind of homogeneous 4.5% standard cider that's it's really just sold based on brand. So we've got to go along there and convince them to take a risk, take something off, and put a brand on that hasn't been heard of. And we've got to differentiate the product. So really, the level of carbonation, and we use a low level of carbonation, on the spec sheet that we send to our third party, we describe a level of carbonation, and we kind of, the way, it might be grams per litre or whatever the third party wants to use. But at the end of the day, when we talk to the guys doing the carbonation, we kind of measure it based on a well-known brand, and we say, well, that cider is X grams per litre, well, we want to be less than that. So our Cloudy Keg cider is a kind of low carbonation level, and it's sweetened using bittersweet juice, and it is pretty turbid. And this is why we've got to differentiate our product away from the standard product in the pubs, but you've got to remember that it is a mass market, and we need to get our cider into that mass market.
Super. James, tell us a little bit about your approach, obviously, to trying to calculate the amount of CO2. You're doing this via the addition of sugar into the keg, and that's producing a certain amount of carbon dioxide. For anybody at home who is looking to have an experiment with doing keg conditioning, are there some sort of things that you found that works best in terms of how adding the sugar back, whether you add any other yeast as well, or whether you're solely reliant upon the wild yeast, and just those kinds of considerations? If you could share, that'd be great. You're just on mute at the moment, sorry.
For sure. We do a bit of both. We do everything, actually. So we have been known to fill into keg fermenting liquid and let it finish its ferment. Process of measuring how much sugar is left in the liquid. And then, roughly 4 grams per litre of sugar will give you 1 bar of pressure. So that's a rough calculation that we used. But we also just primed with sugar, and we also sometimes use yeast. In all cases, when we're filling into keg early on, we add some nutrient. I think that's really important, because as the gets close to finishing the fermentation, it begins. There can be some off flavors which are very much trapped in that keg. So I'd highly advise a dose of nutrient into the keg at the same time as filling with that. In terms of the level of carbonation we're looking for, it's pretty low, actually. And I would say, as a general rule, both high acid ciders and high tannin ciders, we tend to, because we don't, the carbonation clashes with tannins, and we don't want the carbonic acid to increase perception. And the other thing is just the kind of fruit expression. Sometimes like a slightly elevated level of carbonation will lift the aromatics more. So we're trying to balance all of these things when we're thinking about levels for individual products in keg, and bottles for that matter as well. Does that make sense?
I think it does, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, I think this is neatly wrapping up our session here. For our panelists, are there any final things you think that we haven't covered that are quite significant and important when approaching a kegging? Are there any final things that are absolutely crucial for our viewers to be learning and understanding? We've covered it all. That's it. Everybody at home should be able to keg in every single pack type format, keg conditioned or classic. Well, there we go. Oh, look, we might have one more question. Let's see if I can get there. Do you use standard white sugar or brewing sugar is the question. I think that's for James.
I think it's Sri Lankan fair trade extra refined caster sugar.
The classic, the best of. That's amazing. Well, look, thank you very much. And
no, it's fine.
For Rich alluded to it earlier on, that this is effectively part one of two keg discussions. This one very much around the technical aspects of things. Tomorrow morning, we will have a session around the sort of the marketing and sales and very much the consumer facing element, which I'll be hosting. So do come and join that. We'll be joined by another fantastic panel of guests. But for now, to James, Rich, Alan, and Lucie, thank you very much for sharing your time and your knowledge and your wisdom. And hopefully everybody who is watching will have learned a little bit more about some of the things to consider, the do's and the don'ts and the approach to kegging cider. So thank you very much for attending. Have a good day, everyone at home. We'll see you very soon, no doubt. Cheers to you all.
Thanks, Gabe.
Bye. Thanks, Gabe.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Nice. Is that it?
That went well, Gabe. Very good.
Well done, Gabe.
Thank you.
Well done.
I'm going to close this down because I think we're still live, probably. So, all right.
There we are.
We'll see you
Bye,
around.
everyone. Bye.
All right. Cheers.